lovely overview.
Okay, I think hopefully you can
Yep, I can see it.
see this, and hopefully it's in presentation, Jamie.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's working.
All right, so as mentioned, I'm Jessica Sameoto, and I work in the DFO's Maritime region, and I'm based at the Bedford Institute of Oceanography. I'll be presenting the overview of fish habitat work being conducted in the Maritimes region of Canada. And as you can see, this work is being summarized today as part of a larger collaborative team. So before we get too far, a quick disclaimer. Of course, the word fish habitat can mean many things to many people. This presentation focuses solely on fish habitat work related to marine fish species and on projects within the DFO Maritimes region. And the examples presented are not exhaustive, but are representative of current major themes in the region and are being conducted in collaboration with academic partners. So what do we mean when we speak about habitat? Well, of course, habitat can be the physical place where a species lives, its home, its environment, and it can be described, of course, by abiotic or biotic factors. But when we're talking about, so I get my cursor working, there we go. When we're talking about habitat data or how we use habitat information for the purpose of science products, which form the basis of advice to management, our focus has been mainly on benthic habitat mapping or benthoscapes, and also on species distribution modeling or SDMs. And these have mainly been single species focused to date. And just a comment that we focus more on the benthos or on benthic and demersal species. And we recognize that, of course, benthic habitats are often more stable than habitats would be for pelagic species. So benthic habitat mapping can and historically has used discrete samples to derive habitat maps. However, conventional in situ sampling on the seafloor, such as cores, grabs, trawls, imagery, sample relatively small areas, such as meters, making it difficult to use these data alone to derive accurate habitat maps at broader spatial scales. Then came the advent of acoustic survey techniques, and in particular multi-beam echo sounders, also referred to as MBES, in the mid-1990s. And since then, these systems have been increasingly used for benthic habitat mapping since they provide full coverage bathymetry and backscatter data. So the multi-beam systems emit sound waves in a fan shape beneath the ship's hull, and the amount of time it takes for the sound waves to bounce off and return to the receiver is used to determine the water depth, whereas backscatter is another measure of energy obtained from the echo intensity, and it will be dependent on the composition of the seafloor and the operating frequency of the multi-beam system. And the backscatter can really provide a valuable information as a proxy for seafloor geology, seafloor hardness, and seafloor roughness. And in the Maritimes region, benthic habitat mapping efforts have focused in areas that already have multi-beam echo sounder data. So from multi-beam bathymetry and backscatter, additional secondary environmental data layers, of course, can be derived. And these continuous environmental data layers can then be combined with other oceanographic data layers and in situ sampling to result in high-resolution thematic maps. And this really helps us unravel complexities of benthic patterns and processes. And the working definition for marine habitat mapping that we subscribe to is the use of spatially continuous environmental data sets to represent and predict biological patterns on the seafloor in a continuous or discontinuous manner. And this is the definition by Brown et al. In 2011. So through marine habitat mapping, we focus on what are referred to as benthoscapes. So other work on habitat mapping has been done in our region by other departments, such as Natural Resources Canada or NRCan, which for comparability would be a bit more like the US Geological Survey. And NRCan has focused on geological or geophysical interpretations, and this work is often interpreted by eye using additional data such as size scan and cores and grabs. In contrast, the benthoscape approach can be thought of as benthic landscapes. So they describe the biophysical seafloor types of an area that's mapped, and it's the minimum mapping unit at which you have distinctive biophysical characteristics that can be identified and objectively delineated using continuous remote sense data. And we are using these benthoscape products for numerous applications. It's been used to investigate species and community patterns across habitats, which is helping to inform conservation planning and marine spatial planning. So for potentially closed zones for potential sensitive benthic species. It can also be used for monitoring, such as strata development and also post-stratifying survey data that you may already have. And it's also very useful for selecting sentinel sites for monitoring. And we're also using it to advance an ecosystem approach to fisheries management by directly integrating it into stock assessments. And that will be discussed in a bit more detail in the deeper dive presentation later this morning. So the second major focus in our region related to fish habitat is on species distribution modeling, or SDMs for short. And of course, traditional species distribution models use environmental data and minor variables to map species distributions. But of course, more recent statistical advances allow us to model space itself. And we refer to these as spatiotemporal species distribution models, or ST-SDMs. And we have focused on this. And from recent work that we've been involved in, we've found that your results really depend on if you account for space or not, so whether you're accounting for spatial dependence or not. And we found that spatial and temporal components of spatial temporal SDMs can explain more variability than environmental covariates alone. And additionally, what is determined to be significant environmental variables really depends on the model framework that you're using. So this is something to be aware of, particularly for projections into the future. And it's useful to compare multiple models to look for environmental variables that are significant between the models. So just an example, and this again will be gone into in a little bit more detail during the deeper dive portion of the presentations this morning. This is modeled sea cucumber biomass density from survey data in 2019. This is work that master student Nathan Hebert had been doing with us. And we have a non-spatial generalized additive model on the left, and the same model is on the right, but this one explicitly accounts for space. So the same environmental variables are used in each model. It's both modeled with a delta model, and they're displayed on the same scale. And as we can see, there's fairly stark differences in spatial structure and magnitude of the predicted biomass densities between the two models, showing that our results are very much dependent on if we account for space or not within our modeling framework. So how are we approaching habitat indicators, and what are the applications of the species distribution models? Well, we've used them for spatial classification, so using the patterns in the SDMs to bin and recategorize other data to derive new or improved indices, and also improve our understanding of dynamics and drivers. These spatial temporal species distribution models allow us to extract additional information from our existing data sets and leverage this information. And from these spatial temporal SDMs, we found, as just shown, that your results can vary if you account for spatial temporal dependency. And these types of SDMs can improve and result in different survey and fishery indices relative to traditional SDMs. And they also provide new parameters, such as range or connectivity and persistence, that could be used as potentially new indicators. The use of species distribution modeling for marine spatial planning, of course, is not new, but we've used SDMs to evaluate the effectiveness of groundfish closures, and they're being used to help inform the development of MPAs and OECMs, which is other effective area-based conservation measures, and they're helping inform trade-offs between overlapping ocean activities. And then we're also using it for stock assessment to inform stock structure and develop new indices and provide stock assessment advice. And again, this will be can be discussed a little bit more in the deeper dive. So I think I'll stop there, just to mention that most of what I presented will be discussed in a bit more detail during the deeper dive portion of this morning's meeting. But a point of note, I guess, is that there's not a dedicated habitat program in our region. All this work is really from leveraging collaborations and partnerships. And yeah, happy to take any kind of general questions, or we can just wait till the deeper dive portion. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. Is there anybody that has any questions, quick questions? Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I put a note in the chat there. Hopefully we can connect at the WGNARS meeting. But I'm interested in understanding, besides visual interpretation of the remotely sensed data, are you using any AI or machine learning approaches to delineate your benthic habitats?
So, I mean, I guess maybe let's wait till the deeper dive because we do go over how we derive the benthoscape, and yeah, maybe we can get into the kind of a bit of a deeper question and answer then. There's automatic segmentation that's going on to segment the acoustics. So it's not by eye. We're doing it with an automated approach, so it's more reproducible.
Great, thanks. Look forward to trading secrets.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Are there any other quick questions for either Laurel or Jessica just before we move on? I think so. I'm gonna. Hey, Rob.